Ethan Cross stood 30 yards from his cabin in whiteout conditions, watching 2 feet of fresh snow press down on both layers of his roof while warm firelight glowed through 4 windows that should have been dark in a collapsed structure. The double roof system his neighbors had mocked for 6 months was holding perfectly, while 3 cabins down the valley had already failed under the same blizzard that meteorologists were calling a once-in-50-years event. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from, and if stories like this move you, hit that subscribe button, because what happened in the months leading up to that moment would change how people built cabins in the Montana high country. Marcus Webb slowed his truck as he approached Ethan Cross's property on the afternoon of September 12th. What he saw made him brake completely and stare through the windshield with genuine confusion. Ethan's cabin, a solid log structure Marcus had watched him build 2 summers prior, now had what appeared to be a second roof hovering 18 inches above the original. Support posts rose from the cabin's walls, and a complete peaked roof structure sat atop them like a hat worn too high on someone's head. Ethan stood on a ladder against the side of his cabin, securing the final section of metal roofing to the upper structure. He was 42 years old, lean and weathered from mountain living, with the deliberate movements of someone who measured twice and cut once. He glanced down as Marcus approached, but continued working, driving screws through metal into the wooden frame beneath. Marcus walked a slow circle around the cabin. The lower roof remained untouched with wood shingles aged 2 years. Above it, separated by a precise gap maintained by vertical support posts, sat an entirely new roof with metal sheeting over plywood, peaked to match the lower roof's angle. "Ethan," Marcus called up, "what exactly are you building here?" Ethan finished the screw he was driving, tested the metal panel's security, then climbed down the ladder. He was a man of few words, a trait Marcus had learned during their 2 years as neighbors. Former military, someone had mentioned, though Ethan never discussed it. "Second roof," Ethan said simply. Marcus waited for elaboration. When none came, he gestured at the structure. "I can see that, but why?" "Snow load. Last winter, ice dams formed. Interior condensation. Roof stress during heavy accumulation. Standard single roof design has limitations in extreme conditions." "So you built another roof on top of it?" "Above it. Air gap between the 2 layers. Upper roof bears the primary snow load. Lower roof stays protected and maintains thermal efficiency. If the upper structure fails under extreme weight, the lower roof keeps the cabin weather tight." Marcus studied the construction again. The support posts were substantial, 6x6 timbers bolted to the cabin's log walls. The upper roof appeared fully independent, but it still looked excessive, like something built by someone who couldn't stop planning for disasters. "That's a lot of extra work for a backup system," Marcus observed. Ethan shrugged. "Better than a collapsed roof." "Has your roof ever collapsed?" "No." "Then why assume it will?" Ethan looked at Marcus with pale blue eyes that had an intensity Marcus found slightly unsettling. "Tom Ridgway's roof collapsed 3 winters ago. Dale Hutchins had major structural damage 2 winters ago. Sarah Brennan gets ice dams every winter. Standard construction fails under extreme conditions. This won't." Marcus heard another vehicle approaching. Dale Hutchins' red pickup appeared, slowed, then pulled in behind Marcus's truck. Dale climbed out, took one look at Ethan's cabin, and burst out laughing. Dale Hutchins walked toward the cabin, still chuckling, shaking his head in disbelief. He was a contractor who had built half the homes in the valley over the past 30 years. And yet he approached Ethan's structure with the confidence of someone who knew construction inside and out. "Cross, what in the hell are you doing to your cabin?" Dale stopped beside Marcus, hands on his hips, grinning at what he clearly considered a ridiculous sight. Ethan climbed back up his ladder without answering, resuming his work on the metal panels. "He says it's for snow load distribution," Marcus offered. Dale snorted. "Snow load distribution. Brother, I've built cabins in these mountains since before you were born. Single roof is all you need. This is just waste." Ethan continued driving screws, methodical and unhurried. His silence seemed to irritate Dale more than any argument would have. "You know how much extra money you're throwing away on this?" Dale pressed. "Materials, labor time for what? A roof that already works fine?" Ethan paused, looked down at Dale with an expression that revealed nothing. "Your cabin needed $8,000 in repairs 2 winters ago. Roof? Damage from snow load." Dale's grin faded slightly. "That was a freak accumulation year. Won't happen again for decades." "Maybe," Ethan said, and returned to his work. Dale waited for more explanation, but Ethan offered nothing else. After a moment, Dale turned to Marcus. "You seeing this? Man builds a whole second roof because of one bad winter." He raised his voice toward Ethan. "You know what we call this in construction? Over-engineering, spending twice what you need to solve a problem that doesn't exist." Ethan had learned patience in places where impatience meant death. He had spent weeks lying motionless in Afghan mountains, watching enemy positions through a scope, waiting for the single moment when conditions aligned perfectly for a shot. That training didn't leave a person. It became part of how they approached everything. In Helmand Province, winter of 2009, his spotter had questioned why Ethan insisted on digging their hide site 2 feet deeper than standard. Protocol required. 3 days later, mortar fire had hit their position. The extra depth had saved both their lives. The difference between adequate and excellent preparation was often invisible until the moment it mattered. Ethan had returned to civilian life 4 years ago, carrying habits that seemed excessive to people who had never operated in environments where small oversights killed you. He checked door locks twice. He maintained 3 days of food and water as minimum household supply. He planned exit routes from buildings he entered, and he built structures that wouldn't fail under worst-case scenarios. The mountains of Montana were different from the mountains of Afghanistan, but certain principles remained constant. Harsh environments tested everything. What seemed adequate in normal conditions revealed weaknesses under stress. And by the time you discovered those weaknesses during a crisis, it was too late to fix them. Dale was still talking, explaining to Marcus why the double roof was unnecessary, wasteful, the work of someone who didn't understand mountain construction. Ethan tuned out the words. He had learned long ago that some people wouldn't understand preparation until they needed it and didn't have it. Ethan had arrived in Montana in May of 2019. He had mustered out of the Army after 12 years, most of them spent in specialized roles that he didn't discuss and that hadn't prepared him for normal civilian employment. He had saved money during his service, lived cheaply, and had enough to buy 20 acres of mountain property an hour outside Whitefish. The land was remote, accessible by a maintained gravel road that turned into a dirt track for the final 2 miles. Dense pine forest, a small creek running through the eastern edge of the property, and enough elevation to provide views of the surrounding peaks. No neighbors within a mile. Exactly what he wanted. He spent the first month living in a tent while he cleared a building site. He selected a location on high ground with southern exposure for passive solar gain and clear sight lines in all directions. Old habits. He could see anyone approaching long before they reached the cabin. The cabin itself went up that first summer using methods he learned from YouTube videos and construction manuals. He hired no contractors, did all the work himself. Log construction seemed appropriate for the location and provided good insulation value. He cut and hauled logs from his own property, selecting lodgepole pine that grew straight and relatively uniform. Foundation was simple: concrete piers at each corner and mid-span points properly below frost line, floor joists of dimensional lumber topped with plywood, and tongue and groove pine flooring. Walls went up using saddle-notch corner joints, standard technique, adequate for the purpose. He chinked between logs with fiberglass insulation and foam backing, sealed with exterior caulk. The roof was conventional. 2x10 rafters on 24-inch centers, plywood sheathing, asphalt shingles, rated for mountain snow load. 45-degree pitch to shed snow and rain. He installed a metal chimney for a wood stove, proper flashing, everything by code. even though code enforcement didn't reach this far into the backcountry. Interior was Spartan. One large room serving as living space and kitchen, a separate bedroom, a bathroom with composting toilet, and propane-heated shower. He ran power from solar panels and a battery bank, sufficient for LED lighting and charging devices. Water came from the creek, filtered and treated. Heat came from the wood stove and passive solar through south-facing windows. The entire build took 4 months, working alone. By September, he was living in a solid, functional cabin that kept him warm and dry. It wasn't fancy, but it was well built using accepted methods. He was proud of the work. That first winter was mild. Snow came in November, accumulated to perhaps 18 inches at its deepest, melted off during warm spells. The cabin performed well. Interior stayed comfortable. The wood stove heated efficiently. No problems emerged. But Ethan noticed things. When heavy snow did accumulate on the roof, he could hear the structure settling, subtle creaks as weight compressed the joints. After snowmelt, he found minor water stains near the chimney, flashing where ice dams had formed and forced water under the shingles. Interior humidity was higher than ideal, condensation forming on windows during cold nights when he ran the wood stove hot. These weren't failures. They were normal performance characteristics of standard construction. Most people would have ignored them. Ethan documented them in a notebook, measuring snow depth on the roof, recording interior and exterior temperatures, noting when and where ice formed. The second winter arrived early and hard. The first significant snow fell on October 20th, unusual timing that caught many residents unprepared. By November, accumulation on Ethan's roof exceeded 2 feet. By December, it approached 3 feet in drifted areas. Ethan watched the behavior of snow on his roof with the same attention he had once given to wind patterns affecting long-range shots. Snow didn't accumulate uniformly. It drifted based on wind direction, piled deeper on the leeward slope, compressed under its own weight over time. The roof held the load, but he heard more frequent creaking, saw deeper snow compression in the chinking between logs. Ice dams became a serious problem. Heat from the cabin warmed the roof deck, melting the bottom layer of snow. Water ran down to the eaves where temperatures remained below freezing, refreezing into ice. The ice built up, creating a dam that trapped subsequent meltwater. That trapped water found its way under shingles, through tiny gaps in flashing, into the cabin. Ethan placed buckets under 3 separate leak points. He went onto the roof during a brief warm spell and chipped away ice dams, dangerous work on a steep pitch. The solution was temporary. Ice reformed within days. Interior condensation worsened. Warm, moist air from cooking and breathing hit cold window glass and formed frost patterns. That moisture also condensed on the underside of the roof deck in the unheated attic space, creating conditions for mold growth and wood rot. In mid-January, Ethan heard a sound that made him grab his rifle before he realized what it was. A deep crack, like a gunshot, but lower, resonant. Tom Ridgway's cabin, a mile down the valley, had just lost its roof. Ethan pulled on his parka and snowshoes and made the trek to Tom's place. He found the older man standing in his driveway, staring at his collapsed cabin. The entire center section of the roof had failed, rafters snapping under accumulated snow weight, bringing down the ridge beam and creating a V-shaped collapse. Snow had poured into the interior, burying everything. Tom's dog had been, inside. They dug for 2 hours, but found the animal dead, crushed under the collapsed structure. 4 feet of snow up there, Tom said quietly, looking at what remained of his roof. I knew it was getting heavy, kept meaning to shovel it off, just never got to it. Ethan helped Tom salvage what could be saved and secure the structure with tarps. Tom moved into town for the remainder of winter. His cabin was a total loss, insurance covering only a fraction of replacement cost. 2 weeks later, Dale Hutchins had a partial roof failure. Not a complete collapse, but serious structural damage requiring emergency repairs that cost him $8,000 and left his cabin barely habitable for the rest of winter. Ethan returned home each time and looked at his own roof with new understanding. His cabin was holding, but only because this winter's maximum snow load hadn't quite exceeded the design threshold. If accumulation increased another foot, if spring snowmelt was delayed, if conditions aligned wrong, his roof could fail just like the others. Standard construction had limitations. Those limitations were acceptable in average conditions. But mountain weather wasn't average. It was extreme, unpredictable, and unforgiving of inadequate preparation. Ethan spent February researching roof systems while snow continued to accumulate outside. He had satellite internet, slow but functional, and he used it to study everything he could find about snow load management, thermal dynamics, and extreme climate construction. He learned that snow load was calculated in pounds per square foot. Building codes specified minimum roof strength based on regional snow data, but those codes assumed average conditions, not worst-case scenarios. His cabin's roof was rated for 60 pounds per square foot. 3 feet of settled snow weighed approximately 40 pounds per square foot. 4 feet would approach the limit. 5 feet would exceed it. But snow load wasn't the only problem. The thermal issues, the ice dams, the condensation, all stemmed from heat transfer through a single roof deck. Warm interior air heated the roof from below, creating the temperature differential that melted snow and formed ice. Improving insulation helped, but couldn't eliminate the problem entirely. Ethan found references to double roof systems used in Scandinavian countries and high-altitude construction. The concept was straightforward: 2 separate roof structures with an air gap between them. The lower roof stayed warm from interior heat. The upper roof remained cold, matching exterior temperature. The air gap between them provided massive insulation value and prevented the thermal cycling that created ice dams. The system also distributed snow load differently. The upper roof bore the weight of accumulated snow. The lower roof only supported itself and the interior ceiling. If snow accumulation became extreme, the upper structure might fail, but the lower roof would keep the building weather-tight. Ethan sketched designs in his notebook. The existing cabin roof would become the lower roof. He would build a new structure above it, supported by posts anchored to the cabin's walls. The gap needed to be large enough for effective insulation, but small enough to be structurally practical. 18 inches seemed optimal. The upper roof would need its own framing system, completely independent of the lower roof. He would use dimensional lumber, 2x6 rafters on 16-inch centers, stronger than necessary for the span, but sized to handle extreme snow load. Plywood sheathing for the deck, then metal roofing instead of shingles. Metal would shed snow more effectively and last longer with minimal maintenance. Support posts would be critical. They would transfer the upper roof's weight, including snow load, directly to the cabin's walls and foundation. 6x6 timbers seemed appropriate, spaced at 8-foot intervals around the perimeter. He would bolt them to the top logs of the cabin walls, ensuring solid connection. Ventilation was important. The air gap needed to breathe, preventing moisture accumulation. He would leave gaps at the eaves and ridge, screened to prevent animal entry, but allowing air circulation. The design was unconventional but engineered soundly. Ethan ran calculations checking load paths, verifying that his cabin's walls and foundation could handle the additional weight. Everything checked out. The structure would support snow loads far exceeding anything recorded in regional history. Materials would cost roughly $3,000. Lumber for rafters and posts, plywood sheathing, metal roofing panels, bolts, and brackets for connections, flashing and trim. He could afford it. Labor would take approximately 6 weeks working alone. He would start in spring once snow melted sufficiently to work safely. Snow melted through March and April. By early May, the roof was clear, and Ethan began construction. He started by installing the support posts, the critical elements that would transfer all upper roof weight to the cabin's foundation. He measured and marked positions around the cabin's perimeter, 8 feet apart, ensuring they aligned with solid log sections rather than gaps or weak points. Using a drill with a long spade bit, he bored pilot holes through the top logs at precise angles. Each post would bolt through 2 logs, distributing force across multiple connection points. The 6x6 posts were pressure-treated pine, heavy and unwieldy to position alone. Ethan built a temporary bracing system to hold each post vertical while he worked. He lifted each timber into place, aligned it carefully, then drove half-inch bolts through the pre-drilled holes. Each bolt received a washer and nut on both ends, tightened until the connection was rigid. Marcus stopped by on May 9th. He watched Ethan work for a while, then walked around examining the installed posts. "These are serious," Marcus observed. "What are you expecting this roof to hold?" "Whatever accumulates," Ethan replied, checking the vertical alignment of the post he was installing with a 4-foot level. "You really think you need this much structure?" Ethan paused, looked at Marcus. Tom Ridgway didn't think he needed a stronger roof either, until he did. Marcus nodded slowly. "Fair point. How long is this going to take you?" 6 weeks, maybe 7. "You want help? I've got some free time next week." Ethan considered the offer. He preferred working alone, but the work would progress faster with assistance, and Marcus was offering genuinely. "Tuesday, if you're available. I'll be starting the rafter installation." Marcus agreed and left. Ethan finished the final post by sunset. 12 support posts now rose from his cabin's walls, each standing exactly 18 inches above the existing roofline, each perfectly vertical, each through-bolted with hardware rated for thousands of pounds of sheer force. The next phase was building the upper roof's frame. Ethan cut rafters from 2x6 lumber, each piece precisely measured to create a 45-degree roof pitch matching the lower roof. He cut bird's mouth notches where rafters would sit on the top plate. He assembled the top plate first, connecting sections of 2x6 lumber together and mounting them across the tops of the support posts. This created a rectangular frame around the cabin's perimeter, elevated 18 inches above the existing roof. When Marcus returned on Tuesday, they began installing rafters. The work required coordination. One person positioned the rafter while the other secured it. By the end of that day, they had 12 rafters installed. "Starting to look like something," Marcus commented. Ethan nodded. The skeleton of the upper roof now rose above his cabin, a distinct second structure that would soon be complete. Dale Hutchins arrived unannounced on June 3rd, while Ethan was installing the final metal roofing panels. Dale climbed out of his truck with 2 other men Ethan recognized from town, but didn't know by name. All 3 stood in the driveway, looking up at the double-roofed cabin. "Well, I'll be damned," Dale said loudly. "He actually did it, built a whole second roof." The men with him laughed. One pulled out his phone and took a picture. Ethan continued working, driving screws through metal into the plywood decking beneath, methodical and focused. He had 4 more panels to install, then the ridge cap, then flashing around the chimney penetration. "Cross," Dale called up. "You know what this looks like? Looks like you don't trust your own construction. Built a roof, then built another roof because the first one wasn't good enough." Ethan positioned the next panel, ensuring proper overlap with the previous section. He had learned in the military that responding to mockery only encouraged it. "How much did this cost you?" Dale pressed. $3 grand? 4? Money you could have spent on literally anything else useful." One of Dale's companions spoke up. "Maybe he's planning to rent out the space between the roofs. Tiny apartment." More laughter. Dale was enjoying himself. No, I know what it is. It's a conversation piece. People drive by, they see this thing, they stop and ask questions." Ethan finished securing the panel and climbed down to retrieve the next one. As he passed the 3 men, Dale stepped into his path. "Seriously though, Ethan, why? What's the actual reasoning here?" Ethan met his eyes. "Snow load distribution, thermal insulation, structural redundancy. Already explained this." "Right, the engineering justification, but we've been building cabins in these mountains for generations. 1 roof, that's all it takes." You're solving a problem that doesn't need solving. Tom Ridgway would disagree. Dale waved that away. Tom's roof was poorly built. Wrong rafter spacing, inadequate ridge beam. Your roof was built right the first time. This is just paranoia. Ethan picked up the next panel and started back toward his ladder. Dale grabbed his shoulder, stopping him. The touch was light, but presumptuous. Ethan looked at Dale's hand, then at Dale's face. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes made Dale remove his hand immediately. "Just trying to help you see reason," Dale said, backing up slightly. Ethan resumed walking. He climbed the ladder, positioned the panel, and returned to work. Below, Dale and his companions continued their commentary, but Ethan tuned it out. By sunset, word had spread through the small mountain community. The phrase "crosses double roof" became shorthand for unnecessary over-preparation. People drove by slowly to see it. Some stopped and took pictures. Sarah Brennan stopped by on June 5th. Unlike Dale, she approached it with genuine curiosity. "Ethan, I've been hearing about your roof project. Mind if I take a look?" He was installing the ridge cap. "Go ahead." Sarah walked around the cabin slowly, examining the construction from multiple angles. She was in her 50s, lived alone, taught school in Whitefish. Sarah stood back and studied the completed double roof system with an expression that suggested she was trying to understand rather than judge. "Can you explain how this works, the actual mechanics of it?" Ethan climbed down from the ladder. He appreciated straightforward questions asked without condescension. Upper roof bears snow load. Air gap provides insulation. Lower roof stays protected. The gap between them, that's important. Critical, 18 inches of dead air space. Better insulation value than 2 feet of fiberglass. Prevents heat transfer from interior to upper roof surface. Sarah nodded, processing this. "So the upper roof stays cold, same temperature as outside air?" "Correct, which means snow doesn't melt on contact. No melt-freeze cycle. No ice dams." "And if snow gets really heavy, deeper than normal?" "Upper roof handles it. Designed for loads exceeding historical maximums. If somehow it fails under extreme weight, lower roof remains intact. Cabin stays weather-tight." Sarah walked closer to one of the support posts, examining how it connected to the cabin wall. "These posts, they're carrying all the weight?" "They transfer upper roof loads to the cabin's foundation. Each post is bolted through 2 logs, 6-inch timber, rated for vertical loads over 10,000 pounds. 12 posts total around the perimeter." "You designed this yourself?" "Researched existing double roof systems. Adapted the concept to log cabin construction." Sarah touched the metal roofing on the upper structure. "Why metal instead of shingles?" "Sheds snow more effectively. Lower friction coefficient. Heavy snow slides off rather than accumulating indefinitely. Also longer lifespan, minimal maintenance. The lower roof still has shingles. Doesn't need to shed snow. Upper roof does that. Lower roof just needs to be waterproof, which it is." Sarah was quiet for a moment, thinking. "Dale Hutchins thinks you're crazy." "Dale's entitled to his opinion. He's been telling people this is a waste of money, says you don't understand mountain construction." Ethan picked up his tools, preparing to pack up for the day. Dale needed $8,000 in emergency repairs 2 winters ago because his roof couldn't handle snow load. My assessment is that his understanding of mountain construction has limitations. Sarah smiled slightly. "That's diplomatic. Look, I came here partly because I'm curious, but also because I have ice dam problems every winter. Water leaks into my cabin, damages the ceiling. I've tried everything. Better insulation, heat cables. Nothing works completely. Do you think your system would solve that?" "Yes. Ice dams form because of thermal differential. Warm roof deck melts snow, water refreezes at eaves. Double roof system eliminates the warm roof deck. Upper roof stays cold. No melting occurs. No ice dams form. Would this work on an existing cabin like mine?" "Same principle applies. Build elevated roof structure above existing roof. Support it with posts anchored to walls. Create air gap. Use metal roofing on upper surface." How much would something like that cost? Depends on cabin size. Materials, maybe $3,000 to $4,000. Labor, if you hire it out, probably another $4,000 to $6,000. Total $8,000 to $10,000. Sarah considered this. That's expensive. Less expensive than replacing your cabin after a roof collapse, or dealing with water damage every winter for the next 20 years. She laughed. Also diplomatic. Can I take some pictures? For reference, in case I decide to try this. Go ahead. Ethan spent the final week of June completing the detail work that transformed the upper roof from functional to finished. He installed flashing around the chimney penetration, creating a weather-tight seal where the metal pipe passed through both roof layers. The flashing required precise cutting and bending of metal stock, forming channels that would direct water away from the penetration point, regardless of how snow melted or rain fell. Ventilation gaps were next. He installed screened vents at the eaves where the upper roof overhung the cabin walls, allowing air to enter the 18-inch gap. At the ridge, he created similar openings, letting warm air escape. The resulting airflow would prevent moisture accumulation in the dead space while maintaining the insulation value. The final element was trim work around the perimeter where the upper roof's edges were visible. Ethan cut and installed 1x6 boards painted dark brown to match the cabin's stain, giving the structure a finished appearance rather than exposed construction. The trim also helped seal gaps where weather might otherwise penetrate. By July 1st, the project was complete. Ethan stood in his driveway at sunset, examining the result with critical attention. The double roof looked unconventional, no question, but the construction was solid. Every connection was secure. Every detail was executed properly. The structure would perform exactly as designed. Over the next 2 weeks, the mockery intensified. Word had spread beyond immediate neighbors to the broader community. People in Whitefish who had never visited Ethan's property knew about the crazy double roof. Conversations at the hardware store included jokes about Cross's fortress, speculation about military paranoia, suggestions that he didn't trust his own building skills. Frank Coulter, who owned the hardware store where Ethan bought most of his materials, mentioned the talk when Ethan stopped in for supplies on July 14th. "People are curious about your roof," Frank said carefully. "Getting lots of questions about it." "What kind of questions?" "Mostly why. Why you'd build something like that. Some folks think it's smart. Most think it's excessive." Ethan loaded screws and lumber onto the counter. "What do you think?" Frank rang up the purchase. "I think you know what you're doing. You've bought materials from me for 3 years now. Every project you tackle, you research it thoroughly, buy quality supplies, do the work right. If you built a double roof, you had reasons. Snow load, thermal efficiency, structural redundancy. See, that's what I tell people, but Dale Hutchins has been pretty vocal that it's unnecessary. Says he's built cabins for 30 years and never needed anything like that." "Dale needed $8,000 in repairs 2 winters ago," Frank smiled. "I mentioned that. He didn't appreciate it." He bagged Ethan's purchases. "Look, people talk. Small community, not much happens, so when something unusual comes along, it becomes entertainment. Give it time. Something else will catch their attention." But the mockery didn't fade. It became part of how people identified Ethan. Not the quiet guy who lived up the mountain, the guy with the double roof, the guy who over-engineered everything, the ex-military guy who couldn't relax. Marcus remained neutral, neither defending nor mocking the construction. Sarah asked occasional questions, genuinely interested in the engineering. Tom Ridgway, whose cabin had collapsed, stopped by once to examine the system closely. He didn't say much, just walked around taking measurements and nodding to himself. Dale continued to be the most vocal critic. He brought it up at community gatherings, used it as an example in conversations about wasteful spending, made jokes about people who didn't trust standard construction methods. Ethan ignored all of it. September arrived with clear skies and cooling temperatures. Aspen groves turned gold across the mountainsides. Ethan stacked firewood, organized supplies, and prepared for winter, with the same methodical approach he applied to everything. The Farmer's Almanac predicted a harsh winter. National weather. Service long-range forecasts indicated above-average snowfall for the northern Rockies. Ocean temperature patterns suggested persistent storm tracks that would deliver moisture throughout the season. Meteorologists used phrases like significant accumulation events and extended cold periods. Ethan paid attention to these forecasts. Most locals dismissed them as speculation, but he understood probability and risk assessment. Weather prediction wasn't perfect, but patterns existed. When multiple indicators aligned toward severe conditions, prudent people prepared accordingly. He increased his firewood stack from 3 cords to 5. He inventoried his food supplies and added another month's worth of dry goods. He checked his generator, changed the oil, tested the battery. He inspected his snowshoes and purchased a new avalanche shovel with a reinforced blade. On September 28th, a community meeting was held at the volunteer fire station to discuss winter preparedness. Ethan attended, sitting in the back, listening. The fire chief went through standard advisories: maintain emergency supplies, keep driveways accessible, check smoke detectors, have evacuation plans. During the question period, the chief mentioned the weather forecasts. We're expecting a harder winter than usual. Everyone should prepare for extended snow periods and possible isolation if roads become impassable. Dale Hutchins spoke up from the middle of the room. We get these predictions every year. Last winter was mild. Year before that was average. Forecasters always predict doom and gloom to get attention. The chief shrugged. Maybe, but the data suggests we should take it seriously this year. Ocean temps, jet stream positioning, historical patterns, multiple factors pointing toward significant snowfall. My cabin survived 15 winters, Dale continued. Standard construction, nothing fancy. Never had a problem I couldn't handle. Ethan could have pointed out that Dale had $8,000 in damage 2 winters prior, but he remained silent. Arguing accomplished nothing. After the meeting, Sarah approached him outside. You think it's going to be bad this winter? Forecasts suggest that possibility. You're prepared? Yes. She looked concerned. I should probably stock up more. Maybe get someone to check my roof before snow flies. Wouldn't hurt. Marcus joined them, overhearing. You really think we're in for a major winter? Ethan looked at the clear evening sky, mountains dark against the fading light. Weather's unpredictable, but when multiple indicators align, probability increases. Better to prepare for severe conditions and be wrong than the opposite. The double roof, Marcus said. That's part of your preparation. Part of it. Dale walked past, heard the conversation, couldn't resist commenting. Cross is ready for the apocalypse. Meanwhile, the rest of us will handle a normal winter just fine with normal cabins. He walked to his truck, laughing. Sarah watched him go, then turned to Ethan. I hope you're wrong about the weather, but I'm glad you're prepared if you're right. Ethan drove home in darkness, following his headlights up the mountain road to his isolated property. When he arrived, he sat in his truck for a moment, looking at his cabin with its distinctive double roof silhouetted against the stars. It looked strange, he admitted that. But strange didn't mean wrong. The first snow fell on November 4th, earlier than usual. Ethan woke to 3 inches of accumulation covering everything. Light, dry powder that sparkled in morning sunlight. He made coffee and stood on his porch, watching the transformed landscape. By afternoon, another 2 inches had fallen. Ethan went onto his upper roof with a push broom, not to remove snow, but to observe how it accumulated. The metal surface was cold to the touch, same temperature as the air. Snow sat on it without melting, without the wet bottom layer that formed. When roof heat created a thermal interface. He climbed down and checked the lower roof. Reaching up to touch the shingles through the gap between roof layers, he found them barely cold. The 18-inch airspace was working exactly as designed, creating an insulation barrier that kept the lower roof much warmer than the upper surface. Inside the cabin, he noticed immediate differences from previous winters. No condensation formed on the windows despite the temperature differential. Interior humidity remained comfortable. The cabin held heat better, requiring less firewood to maintain temperature. Snow continued intermittently through November. By the 20th, accumulation on both roofs reached 14 inches. Ethan monitored it daily, measuring depth, observing distribution patterns, watching how the upper roof bore the load while the lower roof remained protected. Marcus stopped by on November 23rd, the day before Thanksgiving. He had brought a six-pack of beer at Whiteout. Gesture of neighborliness. They sat on Ethan's porch despite the cold, drinking and watching snow fall lightly through the pines. "Your roof," Marcus said, gesturing with his bottle toward the double structure. "It's got a lot of snow on it. Both levels holding it fine. No ice dams? None, won't form. Upper roof stays cold, no melting occurs." Marcus nodded slowly. "My place has ice building up already. Same problem every year. Gets worse as winter goes on. Heat from your interior is warming your roof deck, melts the snow layer in contact with shingles. Water runs down to the eaves, refreezes." "I know the process. Can't seem to stop it, though." "Only way to stop it is eliminate the heat transfer. Better insulation helps. Ventilated attic helps more. But double roof system eliminates it completely." "Sarah Brennan asked me if I thought your design would work on her cabin." "Would work on any cabin. Same principles apply regardless of structure." Marcus drank his beer, quiet for a while. "Dale's still telling everyone you wasted your money." "Dale's entitled to his opinion. He's also got 2 inches of ice along his entire roof line. Saw it yesterday when I drove past." Ethan said nothing. He had learned that vindication came from results, not arguments. December brought heavier snow. Multiple storms moved through, each adding 6 to 10 inches. By mid-month, accumulation on Ethan's upper roof exceeded 2 feet. The structure showed no stress. Metal panels shed some snow during brief warm periods. What remained compressed gradually under its own weight, but never reached problematic depth. On December 15th, meteorologists began tracking a massive storm system developing in the Gulf of Alaska. Cold air from the Arctic was colliding with warm, moisture-laden air from the Pacific, creating conditions for what forecasters called a potentially historic weather event. The National Weather Service issued statements describing the setup. An atmospheric river would funnel moisture directly into the northern Rockies while temperatures remained well below freezing. The result would be extreme snowfall totals over multiple days, possibly exceeding anything recorded in the past 50 years. Local news stations ran graphics showing the predicted storm track. Computer models agreed on timing. The system would arrive December 20th and persist through December 24th. Snowfall totals were predicted between 4 and 6 feet in the mountains, with higher amounts possible in favored locations. Ethan watched the forecasts with professional detachment. He had provisions for weeks. 5 cords of firewood stacked and covered. Generator fueled and tested. Food supplies adequate. Water filtration system functional. Communications equipment charged. He was prepared for extended isolation. The community reacted with mixed responses. Some people stocked up on supplies, heeding the warnings. Others dismissed the forecasts as media exaggeration. Dale Hutchins fell into the latter category. "They predict monster storms every year," he said loudly at the hardware store on December 17th while Ethan was buying batteries. "Remember last year? Supposed to be catastrophic. We got 18 inches. This'll be the same. Overhyped nonsense." Frank Coulter was selling batteries, flashlights, and propane faster than he could restock shelves. "I don't know, Dale. This forecast looks pretty serious. Multiple models agreeing. Weather Service issuing warnings, not just advisories." "Models are wrong half the time. I've lived here 40 years, seen plenty of big snows. My cabin's handled all of them." Ethan paid for his batteries and left. Whether Dale prepared or didn't prepare was Dale's business. Each person made their own risk assessments. Sarah called that evening, something she rarely did. "Ethan, you watching the weather forecasts?" Yes? Should I be worried? They're saying this could be really bad. Depends on your preparation. You have food, water, heat. 2 weeks of food maybe. Heat's fine. Wood stove works great. Water comes from my well with electric pump. Generator? No. If power goes out, you lose water. Might want to fill some containers as backup. Good idea. What about my roof? The ice dams are already bad. If we get 4 feet of snow like they're saying... Ethan paused. Sarah's cabin had a standard roof already stressed from existing ice buildup. Adding massive snow load on top of that created serious risk. Do you have somewhere else you can stay? In town, maybe? Sarah was quiet. You think it's that serious? I think if forecasts are accurate, cabins with standard roofs and existing ice dam problems could face structural failure. Your cabin fits that description. I don't want to abandon my place. Understood, but have a backup plan. If conditions deteriorate, be ready to leave. She thanked him and hung up. Ethan stood by his window, looking at the dark forest. The storm was coming. People could prepare or not prepare. Results would follow from those choices. The storm hit on December 20th at 2 in the afternoon. Ethan was inside when the wind shifted and snow began falling with intensity he had never witnessed. Visibility dropped to near zero within minutes. What had been a clear view of the forest became a white void. He checked his thermometer. 18 degrees, dropping. Wind from the northwest at sustained 30 miles per hour with gusts higher. Snow falling at rates exceeding 2 inches per hour. The combination created blizzard conditions that would persist for days, according to forecasts. Ethan moved through his cabin checking preparations. Wood stove loaded and burning hot. Water containers filled, battery-powered radio tuned to weather updates, headlamp and flashlights accessible. He pulled on his parka and went outside to assess conditions. The wind hit him immediately, driving snow horizontally into his face. He could barely see his truck parked 20 feet away. He made his way to the upper roof using a fixed ladder he had installed on the cabin's side. Climbing carefully, he reached the surface and measured snow depth. Already 4 inches of new accumulation on top of the 2 feet that had been there. The metal roof was completely cold, no heat transfer from below. Snow sat on it as powder, not melting, not forming ice. He climbed down and checked the lower roof through the gap between layers. The shingles remained relatively warm from interior heat, but no snow touched them. The upper roof was catching everything. Inside, he settled at his table with coffee and his notebook. He would document this storm the way he had documented everything else, measuring accumulation, noting structure performance, recording observations. The cabin creaked occasionally as wind gusts hit it, but the sounds were normal, nothing suggesting stress or failure. By nightfall, snow depth on the upper roof reached 8 inches of new snow. Total accumulation now approached 3 feet. The structure showed no strain. Rafters held firm. Support posts transferred the load to the foundation without issue. Metal roofing shed nothing in these conditions because temperatures were too cold for any melting, but the design remained sound. Radio reports described deteriorating conditions across the region. Highway closures, power outages affecting thousands. Avalanche warnings, rescue operations suspended due to visibility. The storm was performing exactly as forecasted, perhaps exceeding predictions. Ethan ate dinner, fed the wood stove, and prepared for a long night. Through his windows, he could see nothing but white chaos. Wind howled around the cabin's corners, snow piled against the windward walls. But inside, temperature remained comfortable. No drafts penetrated, no moisture condensed. The cabin was holding perfectly. At midnight, he stepped outside again to measure accumulation. 12 inches of new snow. Total depth on the upper roof now approaching 3.5 feet. Still no structural sounds suggesting distress. The double roof system was handling the load exactly as engineered. He went to bed listening to wind and falling snow, confident in his preparation. Day 2 of the blizzard brought no relief. Ethan woke to continued heavy snow and sustained high winds. Visibility remained near zero. Accumulation on his upper roof now exceeded 4 feet, compressed somewhat under its own weight, but still representing massive load. He spent the morning monitoring the storm and maintaining his wood stove. Radio reports described catastrophic conditions. Interstate highway closed. Town of Whitefish operating emergency shelters. Rural residents advised to shelter in place. Snow totals already exceeding 3 feet in valleys, 5 feet in higher elevations. At 11:30, Ethan heard a sound that cut through the wind noise. A deep crack, resonant and sharp from the direction of Marcus's property, a half-mile east. He grabbed his binoculars and went to his east window. Through brief clearings in the blowing snow, he could see Marcus's cabin. The roof was sagging visibly in the center, ridge beam failing under accumulated weight. Even as Ethan watched, the sag increased. The structure was collapsing in slow motion, rafters bending, supports buckling. He pulled on his parka and boots, grabbed his radio, and tried calling Marcus on their shared frequency. Static. He tried again. Nothing. If Marcus was inside, he needed to get out immediately. Ethan opened his door and faced conditions that were beyond dangerous. Wind drove snow with violence that stung exposed skin. Visibility was perhaps 20 feet. Temperature had dropped to single digits. Walking a half-mile in these conditions risked disorientation and freezing. He stepped back inside and made a decision based on tactical assessment. He could not reach Marcus safely. Attempting rescue in whiteout conditions would likely result in 2 people in trouble instead of 1. Marcus was experienced enough to recognize his roof was failing. He would evacuate to his vehicle or another safe location. Ethan returned to the window and continued watching through the binoculars during brief visibility windows. At 12:15, he saw Marcus emerge from his cabin carrying a pack and move toward his truck. The roof sagged further, but hadn't completely collapsed yet. Marcus reached his vehicle, climbed in, and the truck's lights came on. Relief. Marcus was safe and mobile. The cabin could be replaced. By 1 o'clock, Marcus's roof had failed completely. The center section collapsed inward, bringing down walls and creating a pile of broken lumber under accumulating snow. The structure that had sheltered Marcus for years was destroyed in a matter of hours. Ethan scanned other visible cabins through his binoculars. Most were obscured by storm conditions, but he could see portions of Dale Hutchins's place to the southwest. Dale's roof was heavily loaded, sagging visibly, but not yet failed. Day 3 brought the storm's peak intensity. Ethan woke to wind gusts exceeding 50 miles per hour and snow falling at rates that added 3 inches per hour. His upper roof now carried over 5 feet of compressed snow, representing approximately 250 pounds per square foot of load. He went outside at dawn to assess structural integrity. The upper roof showed slight deflection in the center span, expected behavior under extreme load. The rafters were bending minimally but remained well within their elastic range. Support posts stood vertical and rigid. No connections showed signs of failure. The lower roof, protected beneath the upper structure, carried no snow whatsoever. The 18-inch gap remained clear. Interior temperature stayed constant. The system was performing exactly as designed under the most extreme conditions the region had experienced in 50 years. Through breaks in the storm, Ethan observed the surrounding area with binoculars. Marcus's cabin was buried, only portions of walls visible above snow. Dale Hutchins's roof had partially collapsed overnight. The south section had failed, creating an opening where snow poured into the interior. Dale's truck was gone, suggesting he had evacuated. Sarah's cabin, 2 miles west, was not visible from Ethan's position. He tried reaching her on the radio. No response. He tried again every 30 minutes throughout the morning. Silence. At noon, a massive gust hit Ethan's cabin with force that shook the entire structure. He heard creaking from the upper roof, louder than before. He went outside immediately to investigate. The upper roof's center section had deflected noticeably. Not failure, but visible bending under the incredible snow load. Ethan climbed his ladder and examined the rafters. They were bowing, but not cracking. The 2x6 lumber was stressed near its limit, but holding. He made a decision. The upper roof was approaching its maximum capacity. If snowfall continued at current rates, failure was possible within 24 hours. But that was exactly what the system was designed for. If the upper roof failed, it would collapse into the gap between layers, and the lower roof would remain intact, keeping the cabin weather-tight. He climbed down and returned inside. The risk was acceptable. Even in the worst case, he would remain protected. Radio reports described widespread damage across the region. Dozens of buildings had experienced roof failures. Emergency services were overwhelmed. The storm was being called the worst in recorded history for the area. Snowfall totals now exceeded 6 feet in the mountains, with another day of heavy snow forecast. Ethan spent the afternoon reinforcing interior spaces as precaution. He moved essential supplies away from the center of the cabin, where debris would fall if the upper roof collapsed. He prepared a fallback position in the corner, farthest from any potential collapse zone. By evening, snow depth on the upper roof exceeded 6 feet. The structure groaned under the weight, but the support posts held. The connections remained solid. The engineering was holding against forces that had destroyed every standard cabin in the area. Night fell with the storm still raging. Ethan sat by his wood stove, listening to his cabin bear the load, trusting the mathematics and construction that had seemed excessive 6 months ago. The third night was the longest. Wind reached its peak intensity after midnight, sustained gusts over 60 miles per hour, driving snow horizontally. The sound was constant, a roar that made sleep impossible. Ethan sat in his chair by the wood stove, fully dressed, monitoring his cabin's structural integrity. The upper roof groaned continuously now, not the sharp cracks that preceded failure, but deep, sustained sounds of lumber flexing under maximum load. Snow depth exceeded 7 feet, compressed into dense mass that weighed perhaps 300 pounds per square foot. No standard cabin roof in the region could handle such weight. At 2 in the morning, Ethan heard a different sound, a crack from outside, distant but clear, even through the storm, another cabin failing somewhere in the darkness. He couldn't see which one. Visibility was absolute zero beyond his windows. He checked his interior thermometer, 70 degrees. The cabin remained warm and dry despite the chaos outside. No drafts, no moisture, no heat loss. The double roof system's insulation value was keeping interior conditions stable, while exterior conditions were lethal. At 3:30, the loudest crack yet came from his own structure. Ethan stood immediately, grabbing his headlamp. He recognized the sound. Wood failure. A rafter had cracked in the upper roof. He went to his observation point, a spot where he could see into the gap between roof layers. Using his headlamp, he examined the underside of the upper roof. The center rafter had developed a split along its grain, visible stress failure from excessive load. But the rafter hadn't broken completely. It had cracked but remained partially intact, still bearing some load. More importantly, the surrounding rafters were distributing the force. The roof system had redundancy. One rafter failing didn't mean total collapse. The load transferred to adjacent members. Ethan returned to his chair and documented the observation in his notebook. Upper roof approaching failure threshold, but system maintaining integrity through load distribution. No action required. He monitored throughout the night. At 5 in the morning, wind began decreasing noticeably. Snow continued falling, but at reduced rates. By 6, visibility improved slightly. Ethan could see perhaps 50 feet beyond his cabin. The storm was weakening. Radio reports confirmed the pattern. The system was moving east. Another 12 hours of snow expected, but at lighter intensity. The worst had passed. Ethan made coffee and stood on his porch as dawn broke. Light came slowly through heavy clouds, illuminating a transformed landscape. Snow depths were staggering. His truck was buried to its roof. Trees bent under impossible loads. The world was white and silent except for wind. He walked around his cabin, examining the double roof system. 7 feet of snow covered the upper surface, but the structure still stood. One rafter cracked but holding. Support posts vertical and solid. The lower roof completely protected, dry and secure. His engineering had withstood the test. The storm cleared by evening of the 4th day. Ethan woke on December 25th to blue sky and absolute stillness. He dressed and went outside into cold so sharp it hurt to breathe. The thermometer read -8 degrees. He stood in his driveway, 30 yards from his cabin, looking at what he had built. Both roof layers were intact. 7 feet of compressed snow covered the upper roof, but the structure had held. Support posts stood straight. Metal roofing showed no damage. The cracked rafter had not propagated into complete failure. The scene around him was devastating. Marcus's cabin was destroyed, collapsed completely under snow that had buried it. Dale Hutchins's cabin had lost half its roof, the remaining section barely standing. Tom Ridgway's rebuilt cabin showed severe damage. One wall buckled outward from interior snow load after roof penetration. Ethan pulled on snowshoes and made the difficult trek to check on neighbors. He reached Marcus first. The cabin was uninhabitable, but Marcus's truck tracks led away toward town. He had evacuated safely. Dale's place was next. The truck was gone here too, but the damage was catastrophic. The south half of the roof had collapsed entirely. Snow filled the interior. The north section remained standing but showed dangerous structural compromise. The cabin would need to be demolished and rebuilt. Sarah's cabin required a paranoia, 2-mile snowshoe trek. Ethan made it by noon, exhausted from breaking trail through chest-deep snow. Her cabin had survived but barely. The roof had not collapsed, but massive ice dams had formed, and water damage inside was extensive. Her truck was gone. She had evacuated. He returned home as afternoon light faded. The trek back took 3 hours, following his own trail, but still exhausting in the deep snow and extreme cold. When he arrived, he stood again in his driveway, looking at his cabin with its double roof still standing, still solid, still protecting the warm interior from the lethal environment. The warm glow from his windows created stark contrast with the white wilderness. 4 windows radiating yellow light, visible for miles in the gathering darkness. Proof that preparation worked, proof that engineering mattered, proof that what seemed excessive became essential when conditions exceeded normal parameters. Inside, he made dinner and sat by the wood stove, warm and safe, while the temperature outside dropped to -15. His cabin had weathered the worst storm in 50 years without failure. The double roof system had performed flawlessly. Over the next week, neighbors returned to assess damage. Marcus came by on December 30th, seeing Ethan's intact cabin for the first time since the storm. He stood in the driveway, silent, looking at the double roof structure still bearing 7 feet of snow without distress. "You were right," Marcus said finally. "Everyone thought you were crazy, but you were right." Ethan shrugged, just prepared for worst-case scenario. "My cabin's gone. Total loss. Dale's is destroyed. Tom's is barely standing. Sarah's is damaged beyond what insurance will cover. Yours looks like nothing happened. Upper roof took the load. Lower roof stayed protected. System worked as designed." Marcus shook his head slowly. "I should have listened. Should have built something like this." Spring came slowly after the historic winter. Snow melted gradually through March and April. As the upper roof cleared, Ethan assessed the structural damage. The cracked rafter needed replacement. 2 support posts showed minor splitting at bolt connections. Metal roofing had slight deformation in areas of maximum load. He made repairs over 3 weeks, replacing the damaged rafter, reinforcing the support posts, straightening the metal panels. By May, the system was restored to full integrity, ready for the next winter. Marcus rebuilt his cabin that summer. He came to Ethan in April with questions. How much gap between roof layers? What size support posts? Which rafter spacing? Ethan shared his plans freely, explained the engineering principles, helped Marcus understand load distribution and thermal dynamics. Dale Hutchins was slower to change. His insurance covered partial rebuilding costs, but he faced significant out-of-pocket expenses. He hired contractors who built to standard specifications initially. Then, in June, Dale had stopped by Ethan's cabin unannounced. "I want to know about your roof system," Dale said without preamble. No apology for the mockery, no acknowledgement of being wrong, just direct request for information. Ethan provided it. He walked Dale through the design, explained the mathematics, showed him the construction details. Dale listened carefully, asked technical questions, took notes. "I'm adding this to my rebuild," Dale said finally. "Can't afford another failure." Sarah rebuilt with a double roof system, too. Tom Ridgway did the same. By autumn, 4 cabins in the immediate area featured the elevated secondary roof design. From a distance, the cluster of double-roofed structures looked unusual, but they represented shared understanding earned through harsh experience. The following winter was mild. Snow accumulation reached perhaps 2 feet at maximum. The double-roof systems were barely tested. But the winter after that brought another significant storm, not as severe as the historic blizzard, but substantial enough to stress standard construction. Ethan stood on his porch during that storm, watching snow fall heavily, and saw lights glowing from 4 cabins with double roofs, all holding, all warm, all protected. His innovation had spread not through promotion or marketing, but through demonstrated effectiveness under extreme conditions. He never claimed credit, never suggested the design be named after him, never sought recognition. The engineering worked. People adopted it because it solved real problems. That was sufficient. Years later, new residents building in the high country sometimes asked about the unusual roof designs they saw on older cabins. Local contractors explained the history. The blizzard of December 2024. The cabins that failed. The one cabin that survived because someone had over-engineered a solution to a problem most people didn't think existed. Ethan Cross died in 2043 at age 65, quietly in the cabin he had built. His obituary in the Whitefish newspaper mentioned his military service and his years in the mountains. It didn't mention the roof. But in the high country, where winters still tested everything, cabins with double roof systems still stood, warm lights glowing through their windows during storms, silent testimony that survival wasn't about toughness or luck. It was about building infrastructure that eliminated crises before they began. And sometimes the difference between disaster and safety was as simple as an 18-inch gap filled with air, engineered by someone who understood that preparation wasn't paranoia. It was intelligence.